What's up, GoPo? It's Mr. Smith, and welcome into your weekly address, where tonight the topic is the Electoral College. Okay, before we can really talk about what exactly and how the Electoral College works, we've got to talk about why the Electoral College exists. And that really starts with a quick civics lesson in understanding true democracy and why the United States framers of the Constitution shifted away from direct democracy for the presidential elections. True democracy would mean every person in America has the opportunity to elect the president. The candidate with the most votes would go on to the White House. Sounds simple, right? Well, the framers didn't exactly trust that system of true democracy. The general consensus at the convention when the Constitution was written in 1787 truly flowed in the idea that the population was not politically savvy enough to have the responsibility of electing a president. That was one of the biases that many of the framers of the Constitution, who were very wealthy, educated, chosen representatives to go to Philadelphia, that was their position, that was their thesis, and perhaps it was coming from a position of privilege. We already discussed how certain peoples within the early United States were discouraged from voting, women, African Americans especially. But even at the time of the Constitution, many states had provisions to block people from voting. And one of the purest criteria that was necessary in the majority of states to vote in elections was to own land. And for many Americans who were indentured servants, apprentices, or were renting land, voting was exclusive. So right from the beginning, we're dealing with the fact that there was definitely a privilege that came with race, for white people, and especially white males who owned land. So that restricted the vast majority of Americans from voting. But even still, the framers felt protective of the presidency being elected not through direct democracy. And as long as we can understand that that is what's going to happen here come November 3rd, that the popular vote does not elect the president. Because if that was the case, Hillary Clinton would be president right now, running for re-election possibly, because she beat Donald Trump in the last election. And that's not the only time in presidential history where a president has won the popular vote but does not become the president. The Electoral College process really begins with understanding that within the United States, the only place that direct democracy works at the federal election level is with senators and then, of course, with the House of Representatives. Since the framers decided that they were not going to allow the presidency to be determined by a direct democracy, we've got to really focus in now on what the framers did come up to as the system in which presidents would be elected. Where do you go to find what this system is outlined? You go to two places in the Constitution. The first is Article 2, which deals with the executive branch. Much of the executive branch, of course, flows through the presidency, and that's where you'll find the presidential powers. But Article 2 also outlines the Electoral College, and that is where we get this unique system, and it's one of the most unique systems in all of the world in terms of electing a head of state. But the way the Electoral College works, in the way that the Constitution originally presented it, you got to think of it as there are two elections that are going to happen this year for president. The first election will take place on November 3rd. That is going to be the popular vote. And although the popular vote does not, in fact, elect the president, the popular vote is indicative of the way the Electoral College works. So to say the popular vote doesn't matter, that's not quite true. Because as we'll see, the popular vote oftentimes leads directly to the outcome of the Electoral College. So those two things, the popular vote, which is true democracy, and then the Electoral College, which is more representative democracy, those are going to play hand in hand. Now, when everyone votes on November 3rd, when they vote for president, they're effectively not voting for the candidate. Yes, Joe Biden will be on the ballot for the Democratic Party. Yes, Kamala Harris will be listed as his vice president. Same with President Trump and same with Vice President Mike Pence. When you look at the ballot, however, the names that are below the president are actually going to be names of people that you may never even heard of. And those, in fact, are the true electors of the president, because according to the Constitution, Article 2, according to the Constitution, the Electoral College was set up in a way that electors would effectively choose the presidency, not the direct vote. And so when you cast your ballot on election day or mail it in before the election day or go to one of these special early voting setups, you are electing people to go and elect the president. The general guideline that's outlined in the Constitution, of course, is that members of the Electoral College, the big criteria is that they cannot be either office holders at the federal government level, or they cannot have any position within the federal government that would allow them to be under the influence of the election. So congressmen and congresswomen, senators, Supreme Court justices, they cannot be on the Electoral College. Neither can a head of a cabinet position like the Secretary of State, or even a high-ranking official within the FBI, for example, cannot take part in the Electoral College. Electoral College members can be local politicians, they can be teachers, they can be police officers, but effectively each political party sets out with a ballot that has names of people that will go on to become the Electoral College. And these are the people who, in fact, will determine in December, after the popular vote, those Electoral College members will then have to cast their ballots to decide who they choose for president. So one of the questions that you're probably wondering at this point is, well, how many Electoral College members are there?
Count it!
So the number of Electoral College voters that totals in the United States is 538. We arrive at 538 through some simple math. First, you take the total number of representatives that there are in the United States, and currently there are 435 House of Representatives. Next, you take the total number of senators that there are in the United States. That would be 100. So how do we get to 538 from 535? Well, the District of Columbia is given 3 Electoral College votes in the presidential election. That gets to 538. Now, the number that it takes to win the presidency is you have to have a majority, and that means you have to have 270 to win. So that's the magic number in the Electoral College voting, 270. There are and have been times in American history where a candidate has not received 270 votes. Then the election goes off to the House of Representatives. Now, that was a major amendment to the Constitution. The 12th Amendment, in fact, spells out the procedure for what happens if a candidate does not receive a majority. Back in 1800, Thomas Jefferson and Aaron Burr, of Alexander Hamilton fame, tied in the Electoral College vote, and thus the election turned into a chaotic mess, and there was confusion about what to do and how it was going to work. And so ultimately, because it was such a convoluted system, a 12th Amendment was added to the Constitution that really irons out the procedure for what happens if a candidate does not reach 270. Another sort of funky part of the Constitution in the early days was prior to the 1800 election and the 12th Amendment, the vice president was chosen as the runner-up to the election. When the Constitution was originally written in 1787, the vice president would be whoever lost the election, the runner-up. That would have been like Trump winning in 2016 and Hillary being his vice president. That never happens anymore because of the 12th Amendment, which requires that a vice president has to be on a separate ballot, and that's actually a vote that we carry out just like the presidency. So ultimately, the Constitution had to be rewritten to account for some of the quirkiness of the early elections.
Boom, shakalaka!
But ultimately, what happens with those 538 votes is that after the popular vote, and when the Electoral College members convene in their states, their respective states plus DC, so 51 Electoral College meetings will take place ultimately to decide their votes. And this is, again, sort of an interesting part of the Electoral College system. In 48 of 50 states, so 48 of 50 states have a system in which whoever wins the popular vote, their Electoral College representatives have to choose the winner of the popular vote. That is part of their state law. So in Virginia, for example, or Maryland, where most of our Bullis students come from, whoever wins the popular vote, the number of votes that Maryland and Virginia have in the Electoral College, which again is determined by the number of representatives plus senators, however many votes that Virginia and Maryland have, those Electoral College representatives will cast all of their votes for the winner of the popular vote. That's how 48 of 50 states do it. 2 states, Nebraska and Maine, allow their electors to choose whoever they want. So however many votes Maine has, however many votes Nebraska has, those Electoral College members can choose whoever they want in the vote. They're not bound by law. Some states do require by law, however, people to follow through with their voting. And so that's where, you can certainly see perhaps there's a little drama, there's a little intrigue. Is anyone going to break the law? Is anyone going to shift their votes? That almost never happens. It's very rare. It has happened before, and there was talk in 2016 of that happening, but no one broke rank everyone voted along state lines. So that's another quirky part of the Electoral College system, which again, as we've learned so far in this video, although there are tinges of democracy, because the popular vote, as we just learned, does in fact determine who those electoral votes go to in 48 of 50 states, still, it's the people who cast the ballots, those 538 Electoral College members. They are the one who ultimately determine the presidency. And they do that by casting their votes in December. The votes are counted and they're tallied in the Senate. And then the announcement will come through officially. And that confirms who the president is. So even if on election day it is announced that candidate Biden or President Trump win, there still has to be the collection of the electoral votes in December, and those still have to be counted and make sure that there's all 538 are accounted for. And then you come to January 20th, Inauguration Day, which we could have an incumbent, Donald Trump, back in the White House, or we could have Vice President Biden, taking over. So that's effectively the Electoral College breakdown. But before we head out tonight and I say how the past shapes the future, I'm going to bring in a special guest to say goodbye to you guys. Here's Willow, and she's got the Electoral College lesson just like you guys. Willow's not old enough to vote, but when she is, hopefully she'll make a good informed decision and know all about the Electoral College. So from Willow and me, saying goodnight and goodbye, and as always, remember the past shapes the future. Take care, GoPo.